And then given those psychological payoffs and the material payoffs in the game matrix, you can sit down and figure out whether or not that strategy profile could have been in Nash equilibrium. Was each player's action a best response to the other player's actions given their beliefs and their psychological payoffs? Okay? And you should be able to do that. And where am I? Okay, any questions about social preferences before we move on? Okay, only if someone will absolutely guarantee me that it is 0, 0. Yeah, okay. So what you do is this. I'm pulling this out of my hat, so bear with me. Is opera, and I'm not going to write anything down, I'm just going to say it. Is opera a fairness equilibrium? Okay. Given that they both went to opera, what must player 1 have believed? Player 1 must have believed that player 2 was going to go to opera. Player 1 must have believed that player 2 believed player 1 was going to go to opera. Okay? What does that tell us about player 2's intentions? So that means that player 1 must believe that player 2's intentions were to be nice. If you thought I was going to go to opera and you decided to go to opera, sorry, that doesn't mean that they were nice. What that means is that player 1 believes that player 2's intentions were neutral. If you knew I was going to go to opera, then you going to opera was just maximizing your own material payoffs. So that's at no cost to me. So that's neither nice nor nasty, that's just neutral. So there's no psychological payoff involved for player 1. Player 2, since the game is roughly symmetrical, is going to wind up with the same, right? The player 2 must believe that player 1 was going to go to opera, and that player 1 believed player 2 was going to go to opera. Given that, player 2 concludes that player 1's intention was neutral. So since there's no psychological payoffs, we just look at the material payoffs. Yes, it's a Nash equilibrium based on those payoffs. And we could look at opera football and do the same thing. If opera football was what actually happened, could this be a fairness equilibrium? Well, that means that player 1 believed player 2 was going to go to opera, and that player 2 believed player 1 was going to go to football. Well, if you went to opera knowing that I was going to go to football, that means you were mean. That means I'm going to get negative psychological pay. I'm going to get psychological payoff from being mean, right? And then you can figure out, well, this is a dumb thing to do on material payoffs. But if they're both getting positive psychological payoffs from being mean, then this could have been a Nash equilibrium. So that's the way to think about that. Start with what actually happened. What does that tell us about beliefs? Based on those beliefs, what were people's intentions? Based on those intentions, what were the psychological payoffs? And then could that have made that strategy profile into a Nash equilibrium? Okay, moving along. Oh, were there any other questions about social preferences? Yeah, why don't you?
Are they going to this game? Are they going to two of them at the same time?
Yeah, with no communication. Yeah. Yeah. That's not necessarily correct. So the question is, if one of them was being nice and the other was being neutral, that wouldn't be a fairness equilibrium. You can't rule that out. So let's say that one of them is being... Hang on a second. So you're saying, if someone's behavior is such... So my first answer, which I think may be wrong, was that it would depend upon whether or not the material payoffs outweigh any psychological payoffs. But I actually think that may not be a correct answer, and that what you're saying may be right, because being nice is defined as going against your material payoffs. Right? And so you wouldn't do that unless the other person had been nice. So I don't want to go on record for sure, but I think what you just said may be correct. Okay. Third major topic since the last midterm was behavioral game theory. And this section, unfortunately, wound up being a bit shorter than I'd hoped. We do notice, however, we talked about standard game theory solution concepts a few lectures before this section on behavioral game theory, when I first introduced social preferences. So make sure you go back and include that, and make sure that you're completely familiar with these three standard game theory solution concepts, right? Dominant strategies, iterated deletion of dominated strategies, and mutual best response, which we call Nash equilibrium. All pretty straightforward stuff, but make sure you, particularly I think the one that you're going to need to step back and focus on a little bit is iterated deletion of dominated strategies, particularly because it comes up later on under the dominant thinking model. In thinking about these three different solution concepts, I want you to think about the assumptions, these first two assumptions of standard game theory. Okay, the second two, self-interest and correct probability inference, we've already addressed, and we're not going to add to those or incorporate them in this section. The two additional assumptions that we care about in this section with the level K model are that people have unbounded rationality, which in game theory is a very heavy and very strong assumption because it suggests that people are not only capable of doing correct probability inference, but that they're capable of figuring out complicated strategic interactions and the implications for their own payoffs, and if you're incorporating social preferences, other people's payoffs of a complicated set of strategic interdependencies. Right? So this becomes a very burdensome assumption when we get to game theory. It's a fairly burdensome assumption when you talk about probability inferences. It becomes a very burdensome, very strong assumption when you're talking about certain game theory settings. Right? Some games, it's not such a big assumption. The prisoner's dilemma is a no-brainer. Right? The point of dominant strategies is that if you understand payoffs at all, if you have the faintest idea, if your preferences are remotely rational, you should be able to figure out the prisoner's dilemma pretty easily. But as soon as the solution to a game involves multiple rounds of iterative deletion of dominated strategies, or some other thing like figuring out a Nash equilibrium, what's best response, what will I do if you do this, given that you think I'm going to do that, then unbounded rationality becomes a very strong and problematic, in some cases problematic assumption. And the other assumption, which we haven't talked about quite as much, is this common knowledge of rationality. That if both players have unbounded rationality, that they also both correctly believe, that they have rational expectations about the other player's rationality and the other player's beliefs about their rationality. Right? So we talked about that in the little introductory segment in the first lecture about social preferences where I introduced game theory. We talked about that assumption of common knowledge of rationality. These two assumptions together, have really huge implications for game theory, and violations of these two assumptions are what we saw when we looked at, say, for example, the beauty contest and why it doesn't work. It doesn't work because the beauty contest requires an infinite number of rounds of iterated deletion of dominated strategies, and it requires which requires a high degree of unbounded rationality and a high degree of common knowledge of rationality, which are clearly violated. And then we looked at this sort of I would say at this point the dominant behavioral model to capture bounded rationality, failures of both of these assumptions simultaneously, which is the level K model, which should be pretty fresh in your memory. The main work that you have to do in the level K model is to understand the definition of level 0 play. Right? Actually, the only moving part, if you want, in the level K model is how do you define level 0. And in all the applications we've seen so far, level 0 is defined as somebody who just chooses randomly across the action space. So if the action space is go to the sunny cafe, go to the indoor cafe, then a level 0 is someone who just goes to the sunny cafe with 50% probability, goes to the indoor cafe with 50% probability. If the action space is pick a number between 0 and 100, then a level 0 is somebody who just randomly chooses a real number in that range. And again, what we have to care about is not what's the probability that they would have picked any particular number, but what's the average that they would have picked. Okay? And then once you've figured out level 0, once you've figured out how level 0 is defined and what a level 0 player would do, then you can solve for all the other levels with reference to level 0. Where the level 1 believes everyone else is level 0, level 2 believes everyone else is level 1. And you can build a table of the responses of the different levels very easily as soon as you understand level 0. And one of the things I personally really like about the level K model, particularly for writing exam problems, is that you can make the game, you can make a game as complicated as you want and add in goofy random stuff like bringing a laptop to the cafe or going out for a walk, for those of you who looked at the optional problem set 11, and you can still, right, sometimes when you make a game complicated, figuring out Nash equilibrium becomes very, so like, what's really going on here? With level K, it's always completely straightforward. Show me what a level 0 player would do, and from that I can perfectly predict everything else. Okay? Then, in terms of sort of big picture concepts, with the level K model, I want you to be able to understand what I mean when I say it's a non-equilibrium model. Okay? All of our equilibrium concepts, and the way the thing where it's easiest to see this is Nash equilibrium, they all have the feature that in equilibrium, and this is true of the fairness equilibrium as well, they have the feature that in equilibrium, each player is doing the best they can given what the other player did. Okay? That's what we mean by mutual best response. That's the definition of Nash equilibrium. It's also central to the definition of a fairness equilibrium. And if you look at other equilibrium concepts we didn't discuss, like subgame, perfect equilibrium, et cetera, there's a bajillion of them. They all have the feature that in an equilibrium strategy profile, no one can individually and unilaterally make themselves better off by changing their action. Okay? With the level K model, that's not necessarily true. We found all kinds of situations with level K where, depending on what level you assume people are, they could wind up doing something that is sort of, in some sense, perfectly rational given what they believe to be true about the other player, but not actually a best response to what the other player winds up doing. And the reason, right, so you get a disconnect between the predictions of the model, which we believe are more accurate than the predictions of, say, a Nash equilibrium model, and the welfare outcome, the sort of normative implications of the model. There's this breakdown in rational utility maximization under level K where we can predict what someone might do based on a psychologically realistic model of how people think, but we've given up rational utility maximization in some cases because a level K player might do something that is not a best response to their opponents or the other player's actions. So this brings us back to sort of like this whole topic that we've talked about over and over again throughout the course, which is the interaction between rational preferences and rational expectations. Okay? So the level K model doesn't say anything about players' preferences being irrational. But it does. Basically, it's sort of saying that people have bounded rationality. They can't do any sort of an infinite number of rounds or even a very high number of rounds of strategic thinking. As a result of that bounded rationality, they wind up with irrational expectations about the other player. Right? Absolutely intrinsic to the level K model is the assumption that every single player has incorrect beliefs about all of the other players. Every single player in the game, no matter how many there are, in a level K model thinks that they're the smartest person in the game, which manifestly can't be true. Right? One of them can be the smartest player in the game. All the others aren't. And so the way that we capture bounded rationality, limitations on people's cognitive processing power, unintentionally, though probably correctly, results in irrational expectations. And between the two of these deviations from standard assumptions, we wind up with a violation of rational preferences. Right? The underlying preferences weren't irrational, but the choices that people wind up making, because they're basing their choices on bounded rationality and the resulting irrational expectations, the actual choices they wind up making don't actually maximize their own utility functions, given what the other player actually did. Given what they thought the other player was going to do, yes, but given what the other player actually did, no. So again, I want you just to be able to think in a fairly rich way about the interaction of these three big rationality concepts that I've referred to over and over again. Rationality of preferences, which just means that preferences are complete and transitive, that there are no preference reversals in people's underlying preferences. Rational expectations, which means that people know correctly and infer correctly the distribution of probabilities of different states of the world or different outcomes, or that people have correct beliefs about who they're playing against, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And unbounded rationality, that people have an unlimited amount of cognitive processing power so that we can use mathematical models that model people as doing massive amounts of math. Okay. Then we talked about the dominance thinking model. It's not as important as level K. I don't rule out that I might include a question. I don't think I would build a whole problem around it. I might throw in a little piece, like under a harder, if I've been talking about a level K model, I might say, oh, now what if it was a dominance thinking model? How would that differ? I might not talk about it at all. But you should go back through, and again, this comes back to here, under iterative deletion of dominated strategies. You need to know what that means and how to do it, and how to apply it. And once you know how to apply that in a dominance thinking scenario, then you should easily be able to figure out the step 0, step 1, step 2, et cetera, predictions of the model, because they're all based on the assumption that the other player does a certain number of rounds of iterative deletion of dominated strategies, and then chooses randomly over the remaining action space. Okay, so you should understand that, but if you've got limited time and a list of things to focus on, put that one near the bottom. Okay. By the way, I don't know why that wound up in the middle of the page, but is that in the middle of the page on your handout? No. Okay. Okay, whatever. A topic that has come up sometimes as a central theme, sometimes somewhat peripherally throughout the course, that I've never actually focused on directly, which is framing and narrow bracketing. How do we integrate our choices? Right? How do we frame our choices? Let's focus primarily on narrow bracketing, which is a subset of framing. Okay? Narrow bracketing is, do we apply our utility function to just this choice as if it wasn't related to all other choices and outcomes? Or do we integrate this one choice with all of the other related choices and outcomes that affect our preferences? Okay? And we've seen this in a few different ways. The first place it came up was narrow bracketing of income. The daily income targeting and the downward sloping labor supply curve absolutely requires that we believe people are narrow bracketing their income on a daily basis. Right? Because if you're not narrow bracketing your income on a daily basis, if you're even bracketing it over 2 days, you should still work harder on a day with a higher wage. The only way that you can write down a model that gets people working less hard on a day with a higher wage is that they have to be narrowly bracketing their daily income. In other words, making their daily labor choices with reference only to their income that day and without integrating it with their labor efforts and income on other days. Okay? Next place we saw narrow bracketing was with the equity premium puzzle. We said if people have loss aversion with respect to observed outcomes in their portfolio, not the money they get when they sell their stocks or the consumption they get from that money, but simply seeing whether their stocks go up or down. And then if they narrowly bracket their returns, right, they look once a month, and they treat the loss or gain in their portfolio each month as if it was separate from the loss or gain next month or how much money they're going to wind up getting when they sell the stock. If they narrowly bracket that loss gain utility, then you can get an explanation of the equity premium puzzle. So just go back and convince yourself that you understand why that narrow bracketing is necessary to get the result that we saw. The other place we saw narrow bracketing was in problem set on distributional choices, like problem set 10, where people narrowly bracket allocation decisions. Right in the problem set, we had somebody choosing 4-4 versus 18-0, as if that was the only difference in people's outcomes that day, instead of incorporating the 4-4-18-0 choice with, say, some income that one of them had already received that day, or the fact that the individual was making the choice more than once, and instead just applying the utility function to that one choice alone. Okay? The only place where we've seen framing that isn't narrow bracketing, actually, you know what? Let's just ignore that. Pretend that I had not written the word framing, and this is just about narrow bracketing, and then ignore the second bullet point about framing gambles as gains or losses. I don't want you to get distracted with that. All right, my time is basically up. I got 1 minute, so I'm obviously not going to go through this. But this is just so you have a reminder of the main things that we talked about in the first part of the course, and I've outlined them slightly differently than they're outlined in the syllabus. Okay, so I've lumped together reference dependence, which included reference dependence itself, and then risk preferences and prospect theory. So I've lumped those two things together. That was the stuff before the first midterm. And I've lumped together a whole bunch of time-related stuff. So we had the standard model, you need to understand that, the beta-delta model, anticipatory utility, and then also state dependence and preferences and projection bias. I'm lumping that together as a time-related topic, and you should understand how those things are all tied together by the intertemporal dimension, and then, which was most of the middle of the course, right, was that set of topics. And then behavioral economics and public policy, which was a short topic, but I think a particularly important one. I want you to really understand these very basic concepts of Pareto efficiency and Hicks-Calder efficiency, and how they show up in applications of behavioral economics to public policy. And that's the end of my time. So good luck. See you in office hours if you want to come, and otherwise I'll see you at the exam.